It's Christmas Day, 1944, in Rakunai, Papua New Guinea, and you're just trying to make the most of the situation. World War II seems to be coming to a close, but the Japanese soldiers that invaded the country are doing all they can to hold on to power. They've outlawed church services, but that doesn't stop you. With Peter Thorat, a catechist to guide you, you prepare for Christmas service. But soldiers come marching up to take Peter away. He doesn't resist, he stays calm as they march him off, so you just go home, shaken by what happened, unsure what will become of Peter. What will his sentence be? A few days later, you hear he's sentenced to 2 months in a labor camp. You can wait 2 months for him to come back. Finally, those 2 months pass, it's time for him to be released, but they don't do it. Then you learn that the unthinkable happened. Howdy, and welcome back to another episode of the Sanctified Podcast, the show where we explore the stories of various saints throughout history and learn about what they did and how we came to recognize them as saints today. Today, we're going to explore the life of St. Peter Thorat, a man who proves that there's more than one way to be a war hero. Let's start in the beginning. Well, Peter's beginning, not the beginning. Peter Thorat was born March 5th, 1912, in Rakunai, a village in Papua New Guinea, which at the time was German New Guinea. Peter's father was the chief, his name, Angelo Tapuya, and his mother, Maria Jatamul, were both Catholic, and they were among the first to convert in the village in 1898. Peter had 5 siblings, one older brother, one older sister, a younger brother, and then a younger brother and sister who sadly both died as young children. At the time, school was something that only a few people went to, and being the son of the chief, Peter was one of those lucky few. Angelo sent his son to the local mission school, and the teachers there quickly noticed that Peter was a fairly astute child. And they noticed that in his journal of activities that all students had to maintain, Peter always included morning and evening prayers. And like most children in his village, Peter served at Mass, played sports, and he'd help out at home with odd jobs that just needed an extra hand. Overall, he was a very well-behaved child. Something kind of atypical that everyone noticed, though, was just how good he was at being a leader without being disrespectful or condescending or anything, even though he was still just a kid. Around when Peter turned 18, Father Laufer, who was the parish priest, approached Peter's father about Peter becoming a priest himself. But Angelo thought it wasn't time for one of the people of the village to study to become a priest. They had Father Laufer, and the Chief Angelo thought that somebody in the next generation could become the next priest. But he did agree to let Peter take catechism classes. In 1930, Peter went off to study to become a catechist. Peter was very studious, and he was very dedicated to his classwork. Every day he attended Mass and he received communion. And throughout the day, he would stop at the school's church and pray. He continued his active life, helping people with odd jobs, playing sports, and throughout all of this, he only strengthened his leadership skills. But in his third year of studies, he was requested to come back home because his help was desperately needed at the parish. He became their youngest catechist at 21 years old, and his duties included teaching at the parish school and helping the sick. And anyone who spoke ill of his faith quickly found out that he was devoted no matter what others might think. But he never got angry about it. He kept an even keel as he went about his duties and discussions, and he always carried a Bible with him everywhere he went. When Peter was 27, he married Paula Javarpit on November 11th, 1936. She'd been a student in some of his classes, and the two felt a very deep connection with each other. Everyone could easily see just how much they loved one another, and they would pray together every morning and every evening, and they would confide in each other about what worried them each day. They were very close. The couple celebrated the birth of their first child on December 5th, 1939. He was named in honor of Peter's father, Tupoya, who had passed away in 1937, and his Christian name was Andreas. Peter and his son were exceptionally close. They would go everywhere together, which was actually unusual in their culture. It was usually the children would hang out with the mother, not the father. Later, in 1942, Peter and Paula had a daughter, Rufina. Unfortunately, 1942 was the same year that the Japanese invaded Peter's country. Up to that point, they hadn't even seen an airplane. Now, airplanes were being spotted all over on patrols or on bombing runs. For Peter, the Japanese occupation was at the top of his concerns, primarily because word quickly spread that they were hunting down Christian missionaries. Father Laufer was caught and sent to a prison camp in Vanapop. His last words to Peter? Turat, I am leaving all my work here in your hands. Look after these people well. Help them so that they don't forget about God. And despite his fear of being caught, he carried out masses and helped people as much as he could in secret. He still visited the sick and prayed with them, offering the anointing of the sick in preparations for their death, and he also still held classes for anyone brave enough to attend. He told his students, "This is a very bad time for us, and we are all afraid. But God, our Father, is with us and looking after us. We must pray and ask him to stay with us always." And at first, the invaders, the Japanese, were not targeting all Christians, only the missionaries. But as the war went on, they started to target any Christian, and they forbade the practice of any Christian religious services. Peter wanted to continue daily masses and prayers for everyone, but bombings were increasing and places of worship were a popular target. So Peter had to think outside the box. He started gathering with small groups instead in small caves that they'd carved out of the mountains. He even maintained marriage and baptism records all the while. The Japanese tried taking over the rule of the nation, and they gathered local leaders to disseminate their rules and laws. And you probably already know where this is going. One of these rules was to allow men to take a second wife. And previously, before Christianity and Catholicism came over to this region, that was common. The Japanese knew this, and they tried to use it to their advantage. But whatever their motives were, and however successful it might have been, Peter reminded everyone how wrong it was, and he encouraged them to ignore the rule and continue following their faith. But for some, this was enough to abandon their faith. So Peter began to help and provide shelter for women who were being abducted and forced into being a second wife. With how much effort the Japanese invaders were placing on stopping all forms of Christianity, it was just a matter of time before Peter was a primary target, because his never-ending efforts to keep his compatriots safe and encouragement for them to always follow their faith just drew way too much attention. A few of the locals were just too tempted by the chance to have another wife, but the women they wanted were already married. Peter helped the women as much as he could, but the men that wanted them grew very angry and very resentful, and so they turned Peter in to the Japanese. The Japanese soldiers sent to investigate searched all the caves that Peter held services in. They searched his home, and they searched his brothers' homes. All places the people who turned Peter in told them about. They found evidence that Peter was currently practicing his faith, and so they arrested him on the spot, along with his brothers, on Christmas Day, 1944. All three were interrogated, and Peter's brothers admitted to attending services and following their faith. They were beaten and sent to a labor camp. Peter revealed that he had been coordinating everything and leading the services, as well as encouraging people to ignore the Japanese rules. And for that, he was also beaten and sent to the labor camp. After about a month, Peter's brothers were released, which aligned with their sentence. But Peter was sentenced to 2 months. However, he still wasn't released after he had served his time. The village chief asked to have Peter sent home, but his jailers said that Peter was a bad person because of what he did, and so he would not be released. Now, he was allowed to have visitors fairly frequently, which I thought was fairly interesting. I would have expected that he would be denied visitors because he could still offer spiritual guidance or encouragement for anybody that would come to visit him, which is exactly what the Japanese didn't want. But that's not what we're focusing on. We got to focus on the people that came to visit him and exactly what happened after those 2 months went past. Friends and relatives visited Peter constantly, and his wife and mother came to see him every day. They brought him food, and he would tell them, don't worry, because he was in prison for God. Nothing that his captors could do could pull him from his dedication to God. One day, Peter asked Paula to bring his shaving kit, rosary, catechist cross, and a white lap, which was a large loincloth, part of the native garb. And Paula knew what this meant. The next day, July 7th, 1945, she brought everything he had asked for and some food, as well as their children. She noticed Peter just wasn't eating much, and he really wasn't looking all that well at all. Though his spirits were high and he did his best to ease her suspicion and just enjoy time together as a family, well, as best as he could being a prisoner, the two spent a few hours together as much as Peter was allowed. And at this point, Andreas, their first son, was 6, Rufina was 3, and Paula was actually pregnant with their 3rd child. Peter said goodbye to everyone, not in like a final sort of way, like a goodbye, but just a sort of like, see you later, like, bye. And Paula and the children went home. Later that same day, Peter's mother visited. He told her some of the guards had come to him and said that a doctor was going to come give him some medicine later. He said, "I don't know what that means. Perhaps it is a lie. After all, I'm not ill." Now, some sources do say he had a small cold, but that could also just have been fabricated records to justify the medicine. After this time with his mother, he said goodbye again, and they both returned to their homes. Though his home was an unwelcoming, windowless cell, he didn't dwell on the negatives. It was his home. He made the most of it. Peter cleaned himself, shaved, put on his lap, and started praying with the rosary. That evening, all of the prisoners except Peter were taken away to a, quote, party, which is not only weird because it was a labor camp, but especially so because it had never happened before. A few hours after everyone left, they were all told to just go to sleep. And being such an abnormal circumstance, a few prisoners snuck away to go back to camp just because they're like, what the heck's going on back there? There, those few prisoners found Peter dead. They were too scared to say anything, though, fearing that they would be next if they spoke up. At the morning muster, it became apparent to everyone that Peter was missing. They looked for him and found his body. And the prison guards just said that he must have died from a sickness, I guess. His family was called to come retrieve the body, but when they got there, it was blatantly obvious he didn't die from a sickness. They noticed a strange foam with a very peculiar odor coming from his ears, nose, and mouth, suggesting that a poison was used. They also noticed a clear point on his arm that would only be left from a needle. He also had lacerations on the back of his head. His neck was crushed and bruised, and he had bruises all over his body like he'd been beaten. He was given a chief's funeral despite not being a chief himself, and he was buried in the cemetery next to his church. And still living in fear of the Japanese invaders, the funeral was held in silence. Nobody willing to say a word because nobody knew who was basically going to be a spy, turn them in, and maybe they would be executed next. And it really wasn't long after Peter died that World War II came to an end. And it's pretty unfortunate timing. If this had just been a few months later, Peter might have survived. But sadly, that's not how it worked out. That wasn't the plan that was already in store for Peter. He was just a man holding on to his faith, not afraid of what that might bring his way. Peter Thurot was martyred and he was beatified by Pope John Paul II on January 17th, 1995. He was just canonized recently, October 19th, 2025, by Pope Leo XIV. His feast day is July 7th, and he's the patron saint of married couples, catechists, and Rakunai, the village that he was from. Peter is the first saint from Papua New Guinea, which is actually really cool. Peter proved that a war hero doesn't need to be a combatant. All he wanted to do was to be able to peacefully follow his faith. And now he serves as an inspiration to people all around the world, especially catechists and to the people of Rakunai. If you have any questions, please let me know, and I'll do my best to answer them. So, what do you think of St. Peter Thurot? Do you know anybody who has as much dedication to their faith as he did? Even in the face of certain death, he held on. There's not many people who have that level of faith. I hope you found his story interesting and inspirational. I look forward to learning your thoughts about St. Peter, and thanks for listening. If you'd like to support the channel, you can subscribe, download the episode, like, comment, share with your friends, or send me a suggestion on a saint to check out by emailing me at sanctifiedpodcast@proton.me. You can find the show on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music, Podbean, and more. Just search for the Sanctified Podcast on whatever you're using, and I should have a few episodes uploaded. Take care, and have a wonderful day.